Well, hey there! We're back, and finally it's time to talk about the Sony A9 for wedding photographers. So I've had the A9 for a couple of weeks now, and I've shot one wedding with it, a couple of engagement shoots, and I feel like I've gotten a good handle on the pluses and the minuses of shooting with this camera. Number one, the most obvious positive point for this camera that I'm sure everyone is perfectly aware of, is the super fast autofocus. It has an autofocus system that is roughly comparable to a Nikon D5 or a Canon 1DX Mark II. So what does that mean? It means it tracks ridiculously well, it focuses and acquires focus unbelievably fast, is super reliable, and focuses very well in low light conditions. How low light? Well, let's say you're at a wedding reception, you're at the dance floor, the only lights in the room are the occasionally flashing DJ lights. Instead of using a focus lamp or anything like that, you just half press the shutter button, or if you're using back button focus, press the back button. It focuses almost immediately in super low light conditions. That was amazing. Also included, something that other cameras don't have, is the eye autofocus button. So on the back of the camera here, I have it programmed with this button, which isn't going to do much because eye autofocus does not work on baby Groots. But as soon as I press this button, instantly it grabs focus on the closest eye in the room, and then I can take a picture. Now this is especially useful when you're doing portraiture, headshots, as you can see a few examples here. All I have to do is press that button, and bang! The closest eye is exactly in focus. Now, one caveat, 99% of the time it grabs the closest eye, 1% of the time it grabs the other eye. Could it be improved? Possibly, not very much. Doesn't work on cats, doesn't work on bobbleheads, but aside from that, it's pretty fantastic. Now, one thing that I didn't expect with this focusing system and how easily using eye autofocus and face detect autofocus can let you focus on items is that this actually created a fair amount of unexpected downtime for me throughout the wedding day, in that composing and taking images and capturing in between moments was just instantaneous. I didn't have to think about it, I didn't have to work on it. Even just using the wide area autofocus usually captured exactly what I wanted it to capture without even trying. So most of the time I left it on AFC, not AFS for continuous, on low speed shutter, and just captured absolutely everything that I wanted to. And so I actually ended up with some downtime, which was good, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later why. The second thing that makes this camera great is the electronic shutter, silent shutter as you might know it. This is not the old electronic shutter that was in the A7R Mark II or the A7S Mark II. This is a brand new electronic shutter. The sensor is rebuilt from the ground up for this specific purpose. And this electronic shutter is amazing. So not only is it silent, but it does not produce banding and it does not degrade ISO performance. So you can put that in an electronic shutter and not have to worry about those things. If you're in a crappy lit reception hall or church, don't worry about it, you won't get banding. I tested that extensively. I also have a video on that. If it's not up yet, it will be soon. You have the option here to have audio signals on or off. So on, there are a few different simulated signals you can choose from. Mostly it sounds like this. So, slightly electronic sounding, almost a tiny bit futuristic. I would almost prefer something that's radically futuristic just because I'm a nerd. Let's go into the function menu and turn off the shutter sound. Now let's take a picture. Yep, those are pictures being taken. Until you have used a completely silent shutter, it is hard to explain to you how important that quickly becomes. When you're in the middle of a ceremony, in the middle of a first look, in the midst of some private, quiet time that you want to capture candidly, and my work is largely candid based. I do posing as much as I need to, but I love to capture the candid moments. When people can forget that you're there taking pictures and just go about their day, that is just amazing. So you can rattle off 20 frames per second if you want, and no one needs to know that you're taking pictures. Not necessarily in a creepy way, okay? Sometimes it can sound creepy, but this is just fantastic. It's a game changer. And let's show you 20 frames per second, absolutely silent. There it goes. There it goes again. Unbelievable. Now, there are some downsides with this electronic shutter. Although I said that there weren't any, let me elaborate. I think that they're largely firmware issues that Sony needs to correct. Number one, when you're shooting with a flash, the electronic shutter does not work. As soon as I snap this thing on here, try to take a picture, now I'm on the mechanical shutter. That's fine. If electronic shutter doesn't work with flashes, it automatically switches. That's super easy and great. But if you're trying to do HSS, high-speed sync, it does not switch properly. The mechanical shutter will not do high-speed sync properly until you go in and manually switch to mechanical shutter, and then high-speed sync will work. I'm sure that's just a glitch. Sony will fix that in a future firmware update, as long as they watch this video and find out about it. Also, one thing that gets me is the shutter release. If I take this picture on silent shutter, how do you know I took the picture? You get a little box around the screen. That's hard enough to see as it is. Now let's switch to point type autofocus. It's the tiniest little box around your focus center. Unless you are really looking for it, you don't really see that you took the picture. I find that kind of annoying. I would like some more options. I'm sure some people love that. I just don't. Also, when you're using the flip-out screen or you're in the sunlight, that focus box on the back, you can see me using the touchscreen. I didn't use the touchscreen that much. I mostly found it annoying, but that is largely my own issue because I have a gigantic nose that keeps touching the screen and ruining it for me. That focus box is almost impossible to see in daylight on that screen unless you put your eye to the viewfinder. It would also be nice to have an option to change the color or change the weight of the lines in that. I know it's a super common thing and it's just perfectly normal to have a focus box that looks like that, but I would like to see some more options, and Sony's all about options. Which leads me to my next point. This menu system. I've been using Sony for years, but oh my goodness. This menu system is unending. It's great that they've added a favorites menu, and I have stacked that with the options that I actually use. But wow, there's a lot of stuff in here. The problem isn't as simple as it seems. The problem is not the amount of stuff in the menu. The problem is the entire user interface paradigm of cameras. Lots of people have been saying this. Tony Northrup says this. We need to get smartphone engineers in on this problem and fix these user interfaces. We already have touchscreens, just like on a smartphone, but look at this. It does nothing in the menu. The 1DX Mark II, you can touch that screen and operate the menu, but it still has a crappy old-fashioned menu. Let's get a complete revamp of how these menus are done, something intuitive and fast and touch and user-friendly. Because this is none of those things. But, that being said, it's only like 10% worse than everyone else's camera menu, save, I believe it is the Hasselblad. The new mirrorless Hasselblad has a beautiful menu, as does the new Phase 1. Another big change of this camera that got people pretty excited is the battery. You've got more than double the capacity. Now, in an overly optimistic way, I was kind of hoping that I could get through a whole wedding day with one of these batteries. That was foolishness. The battery runtime on these is more based on the amount of time you have the camera active than the number of pictures you take. So if you rattle off as many pictures as you can, I have no doubt that you could get 10 to 20,000 pictures on the electronic shutter on this. But what we're actually looking at for battery life on this has more to do with the amount of time the camera is actively being used. And in that case, you're looking at 4 or 5 hours of active use, which is fine. Now, I have, say, a 12-hour wedding day, we're looking at 2 to 3 batteries of usage, which would be alright if I could get more batteries, but currently in Canada there aren't any available. I have some on order, they'll be in a few days. So what I thought, another great feature of this, is USB charging. I thought I would charge it during some downtime in between things while I'm using my old camera, through the USB port. Oh my goodness, it is slow. I got about 1% of charge per 15 minutes charging. Compared to my smartphone, that is unbelievably terrible. That's plugged into a 2.4 amp USB charger. Eventually, towards the end of the day, because I was enjoying using this camera so much and didn't want to use my old camera, I'm sorry, talking to you, old camera, I was running off of an external battery pack plugged in to my pocket, wire into the side of the camera. I mean, it worked, that was fine, but I can't wait to get my extra batteries. In the meantime, I'll be bringing this to the jobs. This is the external battery charger that comes with the camera. Still not lightning fast, but much faster than charging it inside the camera. Another thing I like about this camera, that some people don't, it's only 24 megapixels. Only. As a wedding photographer, I take a lot of pictures, I deliver a lot of pictures, which means I edit a lot of pictures. 42 megapixels is too much for me. 24 megapixels, it's fantastic. I can still work fast, I can still pull through a lot of photos and not bog down my workflow. Another great thing for wedding photographers, 2-card slots. Now, one complaint people have is one is UHS 2, one is UHS 1. What does that mean? Well, basically, if you're going to be backing up, and what I do is write to both cards at the same time in RAW, and so if I were to be really hammering this camera buffer, it would back up on that number 2 card, but the way that I use it, even shooting 20 frames per second for important things like walking down the aisle and first looks, the kiss during the ceremony, I did not have any issues whatsoever with the buffer. It's just not a problem from the wedding photographer perspective. Unless you're planning on spraying and praying 20 frames per second all day, I would not worry about it. Another thing that I wouldn't worry about, something rumors floating around the internet about overheating. This camera's only going to overheat if you're really pushing it. Very few people have had this happen to them. The vast majority, it has not happened. I haven't even gotten a warning. You're going to have to be taking a lot of pictures, or pictures and video. As a wedding photographer, I wouldn't even cross my mind to worry about this camera overheating. It didn't even get as warm as my A7 Mark II, presumably just because it's more efficient and I'm still taking about the same number of pictures. Another great thing about this camera, like all Sony cameras, is you have a ton of customizability with the body controls. You have custom buttons all over the place. You can change how the function menu and the favorites menu show up. You have this great new dial on the top here where you can quickly switch between manual focus, AFC, AFS. I mostly just use AFC because it's crazy reliable. You can switch your drive modes up here. High, medium, low, single shot. That's fantastic. And one more thing that I want to show you that is largely only relevant to Sony shooters. This fantastic lens right here. This is the Sony 90mm Macro G lens. This is one of the sharpest lenses on Earth, but it is the slowest lens in the Sony full-frame lineup. But one thing I found was, even though normally I'm kind of constrained while doing macro photography work, doing the detail work, if I'm using this lens, I am stuck using this lens. Because you really want to be on the particular focus distance mode on this unless you want to get a lot of hunting. Except on this camera, I'm going to be daring and put it to full range. Normally, that is a recipe for disaster with this lens. Now let's see what Baby Groot thinks about this. Now, with other lenses, that process is pretty much instantaneous. With this lens, there was no hunting there. That is mind-blowing with this lens. So, in conclusion, this is a fantastic wedding photography camera. The only question is it worth $4,500 as a wedding photography camera? In Canada, with tax, this was almost $7,000. Oh! Was it worth it? This is completely changing my wedding day workflow, and I'm actually going to have to keep working on that to figure out how to make best use of this camera. I would say function-wise, this camera is worth every penny of what it is because it is among the best, if not the best camera in the world. There are so many other features that I did not talk about just because they didn't revolutionize the way that I do weddings. The question you have to ask yourself is, even if it's worth that much money, is it worth that much money to you in your wedding day workflow? That's when I can't answer for you. What I can answer for you is any questions you might have about this camera. Leave me a question down in the comment section, and I'll get right back to you. If I have enough questions, I'll make another video and explain everything. If you want to see more of the photos that I've shown you, there's a link in the description that goes to my blog, and there'll be a lot more higher resolution photos to look at from that wedding day. If you want one of these A9 cameras, link in the description for that as well. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe. There's going to be lots more content coming in the future. I might be a little bit slow right now because I'm in wedding season, and oh boy, I have a lot of weddings. So thanks for watching this video. Until next time, go take some photos.